Looks like we have everyone here. Good evening, everyone. My name is Stephanie Scott, and I'm the Acting Director of the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation. And I will be hosting tonight's special event, Every Child Matters, Reconciliation Through Education, Question and Answer. This event is being webcast live after a repeat screening of Every Child Matters, Reconciliation Through Education. If you're unable to join the screening and have not had a chance to watch the program, you can find it on the NCTR YouTube page. It's available in both French and English. The aim of tonight's panel is to focus on the educational aspect of Orange Shirt Day. The discussions will cover how and why the online event was created, how to use the event and the associated resources in the classroom, and the importance of educating our youth on these difficult yet significant topics. We welcome engagement, questions and discussions during this event. We will be monitoring the comments. If there are any disrespectful, racist, or inappropriate comments, we will delete them. Please be respectful. We want this to be a safe place for questions and dialogue. Tonight, I am joined by three incredible voices: Phyllis Webstad, Monique Gray Smith, and Linda Connor. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming back to join us to have this great discussion. So just before we start, I'd like to respectfully ask Phyllis to share a prayer for us before we begin our work.
Unmute first. I have a piece of paper that I read from because I'm not fluent in my language. But I have a prayer that I will say in Shawatmachjeen and then English. Kia el chba'a, te geld gukbi, gukstech guk pien de siet, gukstech guk de juchinuch, gukstech guk de stielen el de southgwa, el de soup, el de kwaselgsten, gukstech guk chwedep. Grandmothers, grandfathers, creator of all good things, thank you for this day. Thank you for allowing us to live another day and for safe passage through the night. Thank you for food, for water, for air, and for our families. And thank you everyone for joining us here today. All my relations.
So thank you for starting us off in a good way, Phyllis. I really appreciate you sharing your words with us and in the language as well. So just before we start, I'm wondering if I could ask each one of you to say a little bit about yourselves. And just because you went first, Phyllis, if we can start with you, and then we'll go to Monique and then Linda.
Okay, so Wade Huchwede, Phyllis Webstad Rinskwout, Stachum Chatlum Staukwen. So hello everyone, my name is Phyllis Webstad. I'm from the Kenno Creek Dog Creek First Nation. I'm coming to you here from Shawatmachuluch, the land of the Shuswap people in Williams Lake, BC. Geography-wise, we are about 7 hours north of Vancouver. I'm the founder of Orange Shirt Day. The orange shirt is based on my story of being a 6-year-old child and having my shirt taken away that my grandmother had purchased for me on my first day of residential school. St. Joseph Indian Residential School is about 15 minutes southwest of Williams Lake, and there were 4 nations that attended the Shuswap, Chilcotin, Carrier, and the people from the Lillooet area were brought in by train. So that's a little bit about me.
Great, thank you. Monique?
Tansian Dotimak, Mitanina Naskomon, Kina Naskomotin to be here this evening. Nesiko Son, Monique Gray Smith, Igwa Mistikwashkikos. My English name is Monique, my traditional name is Mistikwashkikos. My grandfather was Noel Cardinal and my grandmother was Isabel Gray on my mom's side. And on my dad's side, my grandfather was Raymond Smith and my grandmother was Beatrice Johnstone. And I am the proud mom of 17-year-old twins who are the greatest gift I've ever been blessed with, and my greatest teachers, for sure. And I'm honored to be here this evening with Phyllis and Linda and you, Stephanie, and for all of you who are tuning in.
Thank you. Now Linda as well, please.
So bonjour and bonjour and welcome to everyone who's joined us this evening. I'm speaking to you and honored to do so from Treaty 1 land and the homeland of the Métis Nation. I'm honored to be joined by these esteemed panelists, Phyllis and Monique. I want to say, as the social studies consultant for Manitoba Education, I'm honored to speak on behalf of our department, but also education across the country. And lastly, I just like to say that as a teacher in the classroom for over 3 decades, I worked as much as I could to bring knowledge and understanding of Indigenous peoples across our country into the classroom, and my students were always eager to learn more. So I'm so glad to be continuing on this road to reconciliation. Thank you.
Thank you all. So one of the advantages of this new virtual world is that we're able to have this discussion with all of you from across the country. So thank you to each one of you joining us this evening. And right across, we've had people from, East Coast, North that have logged in. So at the end of the panel discussion, there's going to be time set aside for audience to ask questions of the panelists, which will be pulled from Facebook chat. Questions are going to be vetted and gathered with the intent of answering as many as time permits. So I think we'll start, and I'm going to open it up with Phyllis, just because we are discussing Orange Shirt Day and the educational impacts and what we need to do to move forward in regard to reconciliation. So Phyllis, you've traveled extensively to share your story with schools across this country. I'm wondering if you can speak about how important this work is for you and what the primary message is with Orange Shirt Day campaign.
The message, in addition to Every Child Matters, which I'll talk about more in a bit, but Orange Shirt Day was created to have conversation about all aspects of residential schools across, originally it was just for the Cariboo-Chilcotin, but it's moved all across Canada and beyond. It's a day to honor residential school survivors and their families, and to remember those that didn't make it, and not only those that died at residential schools, but those that have since left us because of the legacy of residential schools. And so it's all aspects of residential schools. And Every Child Matters, when we were talking about a month for Orange Shirt Day, we talked about April and then February and different months, but we chose September because September was when the children were taken from their homes. And we chose the 30th because School District 27 was at the table, and they wanted to make sure that teachers had time to settle in and to plan an event and to teach the students about the history. And when we were talking about Every Child Matters, it came up when I shared my story about how when I was there that I felt like I didn't matter. No matter how much we cried, or nobody was coming to tell us and to make it okay for us. We were on our own, basically. And when we thought of our slogan or our saying, Every Child Matters, and it's caught on, and I know a lot of people have asked, well, why not Indigenous children matter? Why not All Lives Matter? Why not this? Why not that? And like everything with Orange Shirt Day, it's like it's being divinely guided. Something above is in charge here, as it is with Every Child Matters. So it's for all races, past, present, and future, we found. So very quickly, that's my answer.
So when you were in the schools and traveling across the country, what did some of those young people say to you when they learned about your story?
A lot of them said that they were sorry, and I always make sure to tell them that this wasn't their fault, that they didn't do this, but it is their responsibility to help make it better and to do something to make it better. And I was just touched with the level of understanding and the empathy that children had across Canada, as once they were given the information, they have the ability to process what information they're giving and to have empathy for our experiences.
And what about your own family? Did they know about your history growing up? What was that like?
For myself, I'm Shuswap or Shawetm. We were impacted. 95% of our people plus were wiped out by the smallpox. So I didn't know that history, and then put onto reserves, and then the residential school system. It was one thing after another. And that was never talked about in the home when I was growing up. And I never learned about it in school. So it's my hope that like locally that history will start to be told. And I didn't even know, we live right by the Fraser River. I didn't even know that our backyard was a graveyard and that we lived in pit houses. I never knew that. So it's a lot of learning for myself as well.
So how can the lessons of Orange Shirt Day go beyond September 30th? Like, what can educators do to support reconciliation in the classrooms from your point of view?
In the second part, the first part of the show or the documentary was about truth, and the second part was about reconciliation. And I wrote down what Senator Sinclair said in his piece. He said, reconciliation is about being friends and treating each other respectfully. So about being friends and treating each other respectfully. And when I was contemplating my answer to this question, it's what can educators do to support reconciliation in the classroom year round? And by supporting the students to be friends and to learn about each other and to treat each other respectfully. That's what they can do, and to keep having conversation and keep learning about all aspects of residential school history.
So you were also part of our steering committee for Every Child Matters. Why was that important for you to be part of that?
This whole orange shirt movement, as I've heard it called, it's divinely guided, and it was meant to be, and for whatever reason my story was chosen, and I'm doing my best to be a part of what's going on. And what I thought of was that we are, when I was watching the documentary and thinking, okay, what do I think, what do I feel, and process everything that I'm watching. And I didn't have anything like this when I was in high school. Like, it would have been amazing to see something like this. But what struck me was that we are diverse from, I always say, top to bottom, left to right in Canada, is the diversity of Indigenous, Métis, and Inuit in Canada, that we are resilient, that we're still here. And you heard that in the show, the documentary. And I added that we're amazing. It's some of the youth in the pieces were, that wasn't me when I was that age. And I wish it were. That almost brings me to tears to say, but that's the truth. And so watch out, world. We have a new emerging youth coming up, and they're going to take Canada and the world by storm. And that residential school, and I say this when I present, this history is not just Indigenous history. This is Canadian history, and everybody needs to learn about it. And yeah, so thank you.
Which are giving me goosebumps. I'm sitting here and, alone, and I wish we could all be present together, because I absolutely believe that we are resilient and we are gonna, take the world by storm. We have so many educators, knowledge keepers, elders, survivors that have been part of this journey. I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. So I was born and raised here in Winnipeg, Manitoba. I'm an intergenerational survivor. My birth mother was taken to residential school. And when she gave birth to me, they automatically took me away. So back then I'm also a 60 scoop survivor too. So I did not have that information and connection to my community growing up, and the stigma and stereotypes that were attached to it. So I had to connect and learn to be proud. And when I hear, you know, women and our people sharing, I absolutely am blown away, because it's been a struggle to come back and learn everything. And I've had great support from everybody. You know, I got to work with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and statement gathering, and everywhere that we went, there were survivors, young and old, that we sat with, and they really wanted us to take what they shared, pass on their knowledge so that this never happens again. And with the creation of Every Child Matters, I honestly believe that we did that because millions of people across the country got to see it. And without all of you involved, that wouldn't have happened. And when you talk about there is a divineness that's happening, I honestly believe that. And my hat is off to all of you, because it was a special time. And our director, our former director, Ryan Moran, had just, you know, he's recently left us for the West Coast, but under his leadership, we were able to accomplish this too. So I just want to acknowledge him too, and know that he remains here with us too in spirit. And we just extended the family even further. So I think it's important to acknowledge him tonight too, because he was a big part of it. I just wanted to move on now, and I wanted to, you know, touch base with Monique, who also had another great experience with us. And I really appreciate your gifts that you shared with us. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering, Monique, if you can tell us a little bit about how you came to work with us and what you created. It's a beautiful, beautiful publication, and it did amazing. So if you want to share that, Monique, we'll start there with you.
For sure, thank you. Well, tonight I come from the beautiful territories of the Wasanich people, and grateful to live here, to raise my family here, to write here. And it was here, I was on my back deck taking a break from working in the yard when the phone rang, and it was Rye, who you just honored, saying, I just want to put an idea out to you. I've been thinking that you would be the person to do this. And it was to write this magazine. And at first I was like, oh yeah, for sure. And he's like, and we need it in a month. And I was like, what? So the timeline was incredibly tight. But I said yes because of the honor and the privilege of visiting with and being witness to the stories, and to bringing the stories to our young citizens and the not so young, because I'm hearing from educators all across this place we call Canada how they're using the magazine. So while yes, it's landing with the young citizens, it's also landing with those who are in the classrooms and administrating the schools and families. And, you know, for me, it was like, okay, who can we bring to life for these young people to read? Who has messages that we might not yet have heard, and who has messages that are still so profound that we need to hear again? Like Phyllis, for example. And I love, Phyllis, how you talked about the divine intervention and being divinely guided, the Every Child Matters and Orange Shirt Day, because I feel sort of like that's how this magazine came to be also, was I had a month of a window where I wasn't writing, and then the phone call came. So, and the people who I had the privilege to visit with, who I wanted to visit with, and if it had happened in person would have been amazing, but it happened over Zoom. And, you know, whenever, for me, I feel like whenever I get to sit with people like Phyllis, Dr. Cindy Blackstock, Dr. Lorna Williams, young Yvonne Hussein, young Caro Yousefi, young Hannah Morningstar, like, oh my gosh, I felt like I was the one who was gifted through this process. And all of those visits were recorded. My daughter and my friend Dina Carroll did all of the transcripts. And I loved that, especially that my daughter did transcripts, because she heard all of the whole interviews at 17 years, then she was 16. Mm-hmm. So, you know, to hear a whole interview with Dr. Cindy Blackstock and Dr. Lorna Williams and Hannah Morningstar and Carl Lutfi, I mean, amazing. Mm-hmm. And in the end, I had 100,000 words. And then the editor, Mark, at Canadian History, said we need 11,000. So I was like, okay. And then it was 7,000. And then it was 5,000. So we went from my office being covered with ideas to like just keep on bringing it down and shrinking. And that was a difficult process because the stories were so beautiful and there were so many messages interwoven into all those stories that to have to take some of them out was excruciating. But I think what's in the magazine are these stories that educators and families and our young citizens can use to educate hearts and minds. So that, like citizens said, like Phyllis said, then we have citizens who will make different decisions. Who, and I agree with you, Phyllis, I was not like one of these young people who we just saw. No way, I was drinking at age 11 and really in a spiral. So I feel like we have these incredible opportunities to help our young citizens, really fulfill those gifts that they've been blessed with and use them in a good way to contribute to the wellness of the world. And I think that the magazine helped pull out some of the stories from incredible humans to hopefully inspire young people to use their gifts. It was a journey.
It was a journey. So, it's quite beautiful, and you've got Rye in there, you and Letitia Spence.
Letitia, she did. The magazine is beautiful, the way they laid it out, the colors, the images, the photos.
And you've chose to use some of the teachings. Why was that important as headers?
That was actually Rye. He wanted those 7 teachings so that there was a common thread all the way from the beginning of the TRC all the way through, so that there was this common thread.
National events.
Yeah.
You talked about medicine as well. Can you tell me a little bit about that and why that's important?
Well, I think that stories are medicine. And I think that when we have stories about love, that love is medicine. And I feel like we need a lot of love as medicine right now. It's no irony, just like Phyllis said so beautifully, here tonight, this has been booked for a long time, and here we are on the eve of an election that can have a ripple around the world. Mm-hmm. And so we need love, and the stories that are in the magazine, but all of the stories that you just watched, when you read anything about truth and reconciliation, the stories are about love. The stories are about hope. The stories are about finding our way home. Like you said so beautifully, Stephanie, that you were a 60 scoop survivor and your mom didn't have a choice. My mom was a 40 scoop survivor, and the same story, didn't have a choice. And so while we tell the stories of residential schools, the stories about the ripple effect of residential schools is also really important for not only our young citizens, but for all of us to understand the huge, huge impact that those schools had and continue to have.
So I guess for the question for me, so being involved and be able to create education publications, what's the next big step that you would like to see educators do or take in educating youth?
I'd say be humble, because the majority of educators who I visit with and share my time with didn't grow up learning this information, right? Just like Phyllis said. And so we're asking of them to educate hearts and minds around really tender information and stories in a way that they don't know, that they might have just come to learn about. And so I think that, to have the humility to say, I didn't grow up learning this. I didn't learn this in school. I didn't learn this in teachers' college. I'm just learning this. So we're going on a journey together. And then the classroom becomes a circle of learning instead of the hierarchy that most classrooms are. And I think that for me, that's really the next step, is how do we have circles of learning instead of hierarchies of learning?
Thank you. So I'm gonna move on to Linda right now, and we'll come back to you. There's still a couple of other questions that I have, so we'll keep moving forward so we hear from everybody. Linda, could you share a little bit about your role as a social studies consultant for Manitoba Education and how education has changed over the last 5 years since the TRC concluded its mandate? Oh, I think you're on mute. You're on mute.
There we go. Okay. Sorry. I was going to say
Okay.
there were two major changes that happened when I joined the Department of Education. First of all, I think our understanding and our approach to teaching history was being transformed through the works of historians such as Dr. Peter Seixas, who actually spent about 15 years in the classroom. So he came with lots of experience. In Manitoba, Ken Osborne was inspirational to guiding us to think differently about history, to stop telling just a linear story or a grand narrative or a one-dimensional story, and to think quite honestly in a more Indigenous way, to see stories, the interconnection between stories, and think in terms of systems thinking is a term that we use. And so, for example, one of the first activities we did to redesign our grade 11 course, because that's when I started at Manitoba Education, we were just embarking on redoing that course. We used Dr. Peter Seixas's work, and what we did was we put a whole bunch of images on a page, and we asked the participants to narrow down those images to like the 5 most important things that students studying Canadian history, in our case in Manitoba, should learn. But while we did that, we started to think about the interconnections of all the images. And so, for example, even though we may have had Captain Canuck on the page, we also had Elijah Harper. And so what are the interconnections of those two stories? Do they tell the same story? What do we need to add? What's missing, etc.? And so we really got into that interconnection and the interrelationship of events, of time, which is such an Indigenous approach to thinking. And the second thing we did was we moved away from outcome-based learning so that students weren't just having to hit a targeted group of memorized facts, but again, we're seeing a big idea story. And so we went to what are known as enduring understandings. That's the language that we used. And I'm going to share one of them that we used for our grade 11 course. First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples have an ongoing role in shaping Canada's history. And that one I was teaching in the classroom when we were working together. I was actually in the classroom, just about to leave the classroom to go into work with Manitoba Education. But that just transformed my thinking in the classroom. Especially if you think of the verb tense, we took things out of the past and talked about shaping Canada. So we looked to the future and the present. And the other thing I liked about it was the active voice in that. And so that's another big change in Manitoba Education. So out of that really grew a better understanding. And since then, even though that was our grade 11 course, we went on to use enduring understandings in our grade 12 course. But we're also now trying to embed these big ideas all the way through from K to 12. So we're sort of using that backward design and sort of going back to our other grades and transforming our way of thinking. So those are the two biggest things, transforming our thinking, not only about teaching history, but also in terms of our curriculum.
I'm also curious about when you were a young child and what you learned and how that has changed for you now.
Well, that's a very good question, because my mother was a displaced person from Estonia. And so her understanding, her knowledge of Indigenous history was just not there. And so she would actually turn to me and ask me questions, you know, tell me more about this country. What are you learning at school? I was very fortunate in those days. It was a long time ago, but I had some wonderful teachers, and they were already thinking along this way. I had Dr. Jean Friesen as a professor at the University of Manitoba. It was the first year, I'm pretty sure, that she offered a course on, it was called The History of the North American Indian, because that was the term we used at that time. But she was way ahead of most people who were understanding Indigenous histories. And so she just, again, helped me on this incredible road. And as many of you have talked about, that there seems to be this divine calling. And quite honestly, this morning I was on a call with a parent about homeschooling as part of my job. And I told her, I said, we had this great conversation. And I said, well, thank you. This has been so inspiring. And she said this to me: there's a reason why the Creator puts people in our path. And I just thought, wow, I've had some amazing people in my path.
Yeah, we have too, and you know, every day that I get to do this work, you know, on behalf of our peoples and the country, I definitely am honored, because one of the things about the project Every Child Matters is that we had a lot of partners. We had the National Film Board, we had Canada's History, we had Wapakoni Mobile. So all of the artist creators were contributing at once. And, you know, there was only one person that we had asked that couldn't do it. And it was because of like a necessarily like a tight timeline, but everybody else said yes. And we're just like, I can't believe this. So we had a very nice, lovely table. And we worked with both Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples, because it was important that we start to, you know, not only for Indigenous peoples to be solely responsible to do the education, but that we come together and we learn from each other. And some of the editors and writers that we were working with too, Ryan I wrote, and Lindsay Cox from Insight Productions, they were also having some learning experiences. And there's one story where I had created a beautiful song in regard to the memory of the children that had never returned home from residential schools. And so we played that within the programming, the 90-minute programming, and the editor shared it with his family. And they said, I had absolutely no idea. And they were crying tears, and he sent us a lovely email because they're like, I can't believe that I did not learn this in school. So, you know, it was so important that we all came together to continue that journey. And I think that's really, you know, a direction that we need to go into, because we have to share and learn together. And when you talk about the circles of education, that's what I believe is absolutely important. Mm-hmm. And then I have a couple of questions here for you too, Linda, just before we move on. So what changes can be made? You talked a little bit about this, be made to curriculum to broaden its present reach, including Indigenous history and voice in schools.
So one course that was in existence, although it wasn't offered in many schools, it was an optional course called First Nations, Métis and Indigenous People, Current Topics. And since that time, that course has become more and more popular, even though it is an optional course in grade 12. And it's so popular, and we're realizing that we need more stepping stones to get us there to talk about current topics. So I'm working with the Indigenous consultants, and we have a team of educators who are part of that, as well as the Manitoba First Nations Education Resource Center is part of that, and we have an elder who's part of it to help us guide our thinking. And so we're hoping very shortly that it'll be offered in grade 9, and then an additional course in grade 10 and grade 11 as a stepping stone towards the grade 12 course. We've also worked with the Treaty Relations Commission of Manitoba. When I started, that was one of my first tasks, was to help work on the kit. And so that kit now is K up to grade 12. And so I was so impressed with the TRCM, how they relied on our existing curricula and then embedded Indigenous knowledge and understanding and perspectives in their kit. And so we've done a lot of workshops, training sessions with teachers. And so that's another area. And certainly the work with the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation. I mean, just to watch the numbers go up of teachers and students who became engaged in the program was inspiring. That voice is being heard. You know, the song they played, "Hello, is anybody listening?" There's a lot of voices out there listening.
There is, and you know, we heard from hundreds of them. So, you know, we did get some feedback, and not one person said they disliked the programming, that, you know, it was really helpful for them to include those stories in their day, you know, activities for the youth right across the country. I also wanted to know, you know, what would you recommend that people can do in their day-to-day lives or in the workplaces to educate themselves and others in truth and reconciliation?
Well, I think first of all, read. I know that for educators, I've highly recommended, you know, you can read fiction, the works of Richard Wagamese, you know, really touch your heart and your head at the same time. Any of his books I highly recommend. Or nonfiction, Chelsea Bell, her book, Indigenous Rights, WRITES, a great first, you know, starter for a lot of educators. That would be the first thing I'd recommend. Keep learning. We're all treaty people. I remember when I drove by in Winnipeg, because we're on ceded territory, obviously Treaty 1 territory here in Winnipeg. I drove by the posters that were up, "We are all treaty people." And we're hearing so many people use treaty land acknowledgements when they begin sporting events or whatever, and that's all part of learning. And I often remind audiences that when we give that land acknowledgement, we're not just thinking about 1871, about the past, but we're also thinking about the present. And here in Winnipeg, we're watching our own community being transformed on the corner of Grant and Kenniston, where due to unfulfilled treaty promises, that land has now come into the domain of Indigenous communities in Manitoba, and they are looking at a different future for that area. And so all the buildings have been torn down. It's quite a massive area, and it's so exciting to think about what the future will be. There might be museums, residential places, businesses. We don't really know. We've seen some drawings and potential ideas, but I find that exciting as a Canadian. So I think a lot of Winnipeggers are wondering what's next. And so that's all part of learning. And then finally, staying connected. And there are groups like the Circles for Reconciliation. And here I'm really proud to be part of that group because of my work there, I've done sessions with a part of Circles for Reconciliation is half the participants have to be Indigenous and half non-Indigenous. And so we did a session at the Manitoba Museum for the staff, and they really took to heart. I mean, it literally was a history lesson for them, but it also took them in the present to reevaluate the way the museum, it was the Children's Museum, the way the museum's being set up. The blanket exercise, the Indigenous consultants I work with, we've gone to work with the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Justice to give sessions. We also have memorandums of understanding with the Manitoba Museum. And I'll just read you one of the mandates that we have. Collaborate to ensure that First Nations, Métis, and Indigenous perspectives are explicitly reflected in the development of learning resources and programs. So to that end, we now see bringing our stories forward as a new educational program that's come out of the museum. So those are the types of things, as I said, reading, learning, and staying connected.
Can I ask you, Monique, the same question, what you'd recommend that people can do in their daily lives to move reconciliation forward?
I agree to read, for sure. I think that, you know, there's so many books that have come out, again, fiction, nonfiction. I think of Michelle Good's new book, Five Little Indians. I think about the work of Eden Robinson, Cherie DeMoline, Katerina Vermette. Julie Flett, you know, because it isn't always that the books for the older citizens, but we also have to remember the books for the littlest citizens. And because we're educating hearts and minds at that young age, so that when they become adults, we don't have a lot of repair work to do. That's part of this, I think, is it, you know, we as this place called Canada, we're doing a lot of repair work because it was very intentional that education was, you know, blinded to teaching residential schools.
Yeah.
So
you've written a list of books as well. Can you tell us a little bit about those?
the books I've written?
Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say one more first.
Oh, sorry.
About David A. Robertson's book, When We Were Alone, illustrated by Julie Flett, probably one of the most poignant books for little people. I have 3 children's books. The most recent one that just came out called When We Are Kind, about the importance of kindness with ourselves, with each other, with the animals, all that fly, that swim, and with the earth. And that knowingness of what it feels like to be kind to others and to be able to receive kindness. And then Speaking Our Truth was written for it's marketed for 9 to like 14-year-olds, but I think it's for 9 to 90-year-olds. And it really does take people on a journey to understand not only history, but where we are today and where we can go in the future. And I think that that's a really important place for those who are coming to this conversation new, is to understand all of that, to understand the history, or to understand it as much as they can. I don't know if we can all fully understand it, except for those who have survived it, to understand where we are today and to think about a future that could be different than both where we've come from and where we are today.
Thank you. And Phyllis, what would you recommend that people do in their everyday lives to move truth and reconciliation forward?
I work with the Orange Shirt Society, and we have 3 purposes. And our first one is to support Indian residential school reconciliation. And when we were writing our book, we just got this book. It came out in August, Orange Shirt Day.
Beautiful.
And all the proceeds goes to the Orange Shirt Society. But I was Googling residential school reconciliation because I had never heard that term before until we had it in our purposes. And it's not on Google. And so we had to really think, okay, what are we trying to say here? But instead of reconciliation, like the whole gamut, the whole everything, the Orange Shirt Society focuses on residential school related reconciliation. And that's what we focus on. And so there's a whole chapter in the book on reconciliation. This book is geared towards grade 5 and up, but it's for parents as well, because the students go home and their parents, a lot of them don't know what they're talking about. And so they can go to the book. And it's also for corporates. I've been doing more corporate virtual presentations this year than I have ever done. And so this is for the corporate people as well. You asked Monique about her books, so I'm going to tell you about mine too.
Beautiful. I love it. I'm sitting with so many gifted people here. I'm quite envious.
So this is the Orange Shirt story. It's available in English, French, and Shwapmachjeen or Shuswap. Comes with curriculum, and it's available on my publisher's website at medicinewheel.education. And Medicine Wheel is a small publisher out of Victoria, BC. And I didn't have a manuscript when I was wanted to tell my story. I had an outline and I had the oral in here, what the story was. And I couldn't find a mainstream publisher. And Medicine Wheel knew how to work with me. So he works with elders. I'm not really an elder, but he works with elders to get their stories out. And so this came out last year. Phyllis's Orange Shirt, the nuns and the crying were taken out. And the story was rewritten to rhyme. So it's for the age 4 to 6. So the whole array of ages. And I have about another book. It's about half done. It's called Beyond the Orange Shirt Story. So it'll have great grandma, grandma, myself, my son, my grandchildren, and so it'll be a whole range of my aunt that raised me, different people's thoughts and their about residential school and the impact it's had on their lives and what their experiences have been. So just everybody has a story, so everybody just keep talking, keep telling each other your stories. And I recently found my biological father, and I like hearing the stories of his family and how, even with my husband, he's non-Indigenous, and he's learning his history about the Irish, how they came to Canada. And so I like hearing those as well. So everybody just keep talking.
May I for a second, Stephanie?
Yeah, please do.
So one of the people I interviewed for Every Child Matters was Elder Yvonne Rigsby Jones. And she told this beautiful story about being on the ferry, BC Ferries, and in the gift store. And there was this little guy who pulled Phyllis's book off the shelf and said, "Look, Mom, this is Phyllis's book about Orange Shirt Day." And she said, "I don't know what's Orange Shirt Day." So he was about 4. And so he explained to her right there in the gift shop on BC Ferries what Orange Shirt Day is and what residential schools were. So I just wanted to share that story because we had to cut it in the magazine. But I think it's so poignant, Phyllis, around how powerful and important your books are for all of the ages. Like you're about to release your 4th one, right? There's a beautiful cycle of 4. And every time I see you on the BC or Canadian bestseller list, I'm like, yes.
Yay!
Exactly, right?
It's
Yeah.
amazing. It's amazing
It is.
work because it is true. And it's the same thing with my grandsons. They've gone into kindergarten, whereas I didn't learn that. It's prevalent. They know their mother-in-law's, their grandmother's history too now, So, I mean, it's something that I didn't have growing up. So my hat's off to you for sure for bringing the country together and having that divineness happen and help us to learn. So it's super instrumental in moving us forward. And I bet you didn't have any idea at the time that was going to take place, or did you? I don't know. What did you think when that happened? What's that like?
Well, in 2013, when Orange Shirt Day started, I was unemployed, and being the nosy person I am, I invited myself to the planning meetings when the TRC was coming here to Williams Lake. And at the same time, the reunion was being talked about. So we decided to tack a reunion onto the TRC. So Monday to Friday, TRC, starting Friday to Sunday, reunion of the survivors of residential school. So I wasn't working, so I was on both committees, so I was able to bring information back and forth. And that's how I got to tell my Orange Shirt story for the first time. And originally it was in response to Murray Sinclair challenging Canadians to keep the conversation happening after the TRC wrapped up. And we thought Orange Shirt Day, there's more of a story to it than that, but it's in our book, that once a year we would talk about St. Joseph, because the person, Chief Red Robbins from Alkali Lake, one of our Shuswap bands, found that people in Williams Lake had no idea that the residential school even existed and didn't know the impacts on our city. And so he was instrumental. So he basically opened the door to Orange Shirt Day. But originally it was just supposed to be for the Caribou Chilcotin, and Pastor Shannon, she's with the Presbyterian Church in Carrier Territory in Quesnel area. She phoned me at home before the TRC came, and when Orange Shirt Day was born in April of 2013. And she asked me if she could help me make it virtual or viral. And I said, okay. And I forgot about our conversation. And the TRC was coming to Vancouver. And I fly down to Vancouver and I'm walking along, minding my own business. It's at the PNE grounds, which is really big. Backpack on my back and taking in everything. And somebody hands me a 4x6 card, and it was orange 4x6 with a shirt with a Facebook page, and it said "Wear Orange, September 30th," and like to honor survivors and their families and those that didn't make it. And I was looking at it, I was like, what? That sounds like me. And I'm looking at this card. It took me a couple of hours to remember my conversation with Shannon. But what she did was some survivors and people of their Presbyterian ministry made 5,000 of these cards, and they were passing them out at the Vancouver TRC event.
Yeah.
So from the very first, it still gives me goosebumps. Orange Shirt Day just went, it was timely. So that's, originally it was just for the Caribou Chilcotin, and but it's grown to what it is today. Yeah, it's crazy. I would have never have thought that it would be what it is. And there's Bill C5 in the House of Commons right now, and it replaces Bill C369. So September 30th of 2021 could be a first year of a statutory holiday. Like, how crazy is that? And
Incredible.
when they were debating the bill, it's past second reading, it's going to committee now, and then but the biggest concern in the House of Commons was education about the history in Indigenous history, which is what we're talking about right now. So when they were talking about it, it's like, we got that covered already. That's happening already. So there's no debate about whether that's happening or not. It's well on the way, because in 2013, when Orange Shirt Day was starting, I would get a lot of emails from teachers asking about curriculum and how do I introduce this to my class? And geez, I'm not a teacher. My education is business and finance. Like, I like to be tucked away in my office. And so I would send them the Manitoba curriculum. I share it. I would share it and share it. And it got shared, I still remember, 453 times leading up to Orange Shirt Day. And so right now on our webpage, we have a resources link, and we link to everything we could find across Canada and beyond to do with residential school history. So I'll be sure to check our resource link to make sure we're up to date with what's out there. So
Okay.
I don't know if that answered your question. I just went on.
It did answer it. I think it's a great story for sure. And knowing that, like, I asked you about youth. So when you go into those, you've made it to the corporate world and offices now. So when you share your story in that environment, what's that like?
I shared my story. I have a friend who works in TELUS, and he twisted my rubber arm. I presented to BC Hydro, and then I went across a few blocks down in Vancouver to TELUS. And it was a Friday afternoon, and I told my story like I normally do. And there was about 80 TELUS staff, and at the very end, they just sat there looking at me. And I always forget the information that I'm giving, and that it's them hearing this stuff a lot for the first time. And I had to break the silence, and it's like, yeah, I realize, say something to break the silence. And so now I often just say, well, at the end, if we could just take a minute to take a deep breath, and before we start to have any kind of discussion, and have a drink of water and compose ourselves. But I've been doing everything from federal, provincial, colleges, universities, corporations. A big one is Accenture, Deloitte, like all across Canada. Yeah. So it's interesting, and it's actually, I wouldn't say I do have fun, because they're very interested in helping to make change. and I don't know all the ways to help to make change, but yeah, so I can recruit people. So if anybody has any ideas for the corporate people, let me know.
A little plug in there. So it's 8 o'clock now. I just, I got a little note here. We have some questions from the audience. So perhaps I'm going to read it out, and then maybe if each one of you wants to answer the question, we'll go that way. I think that'd be a good route, so that we're all engaged in the dialogue or conversation. Angela asks, as a third-year child and youth care student practitioner, how can I decolonize my practice? So this is I'm just going to read it first and then we'll go from there. It's pretty lengthy, this question. So, as a third-year child and youth care student practitioner, how can I decolonize my practice? What can I do as a white settler to make this world a little easier to be in for the Indigenous peoples of my community? That's the first question. Okay, that was the first question, which is kind of twofold. So, Monique, do you want to start?
Oh, I think that's a huge question. I would just say, in regards to practice, don't bring any papers. Visit with people. If you have forms that have to be filled out, don't fill them out in the first 3 or 4 visits. Like, make relationships. Like, I think that is the most powerful way to decolonize, is to focus on the relationships and to focus on reciprocal relationships. Because I still think that many of those systems, including child welfare, child and youth, in many ways of contributing, are system bases in which one person has the answer and the other doesn't, instead of realizing what are the answers that those who you're privileged to work with have, and how do you bring that forward for them. Those are huge questions.
That's a very big question. Linda, do you want to speak to the questions? Do you want me to repeat it?
No, that's fine. I was going to say basically the same thing as Monique. I would establish relationships with the Indigenous community in your region. I would, you don't have to have all the answers. There are so many leaders in the Indigenous community who would be interested in working with you. Seek out an elder in your community, and then go to some of the national organizations like the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation. I mean, they're there to work with you and to put those calls to action into reality. So don't hesitate to ask. In this day and age, we're only a keyboard away from one another. So I don't think it's that difficult to make those connections.
Great. Phyllis?
I have been asking myself the same thing, because I worked in the federal government where everything is very regimented, and even setting up this office going one way with policies and different things, and you got to do things by the book, and okay, but what's the Indigenous way? And I seen a woman online that her education was decolonizing the corporate world, and I thought, oh, I need to make friends with her. But yeah, so it's on the minds of everybody, basically. How do we do this? And nobody has the answer, and there's no right way. There's as many answers, I think, as there are people. And like they said, keep talking, keep having relationships with people. Yeah, that's a huge one.
Okay. And we also we've got a couple more coming in, so maybe I'll just go and I'll ask this one. This is a large one too. In your view, what needs to happen to stop the overrepresentation of Indigenous children in the child welfare system? Monique, you want to take that one? I'll just go by where the squares are, so that we're all, unless somebody wants to volunteer first.
Oh my gosh, that is probably, other than policing, I think that is the system that we most need to dismantle and find ways back to upholding the dignity of families and helping families to remember the old ways and learn new ways to raise up children. because as soon as we begin the removal process, so much happens. Like my family, I shared my mom was removed in 1940, and we've had now, you know, in December, it'll be 80 years of attempting to find our way home. And so every time child welfare does that today, it still happens. So it really is about how do we create a system that helps our families to be well. And that's an investment. That is a fiscal investment by provincial and federal governments to help with that. Because it is about, you know, there's reasons why families might not remember that, might not know how to do that. And so we have to put in supports to support them in order to be well. Not take the child away, put in supports.
Supports are key. It's difficult. I was you know, a young mother living on assistance, and you know, fortunately I did find some supports because, you know, it was a struggle, but I had family that came around me, and there was one woman who was actually a social worker that said, just try this, you know, take the next step. And I started out in administration too, and then I seemed to be, you know, learning. The more I learned, the more I was able to better provide for my family. And, you know, I have 2 beautiful twin daughters myself, and, you know, 3 grandsons, and number 4 on the way. So may we all have a healthy, you know, life, and be able to feed our young children and teach them our ways and our stories. So Linda, do you have any? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I just want to share quickly, I use this term cookie people, that people who are in our lives who see us, who see the beauty in us when we don't yet see it in ourselves, and really call us to be bigger than we think we can be. And I don't mean about ego, but really about who we can be. And I think we all need those cookie people. Like you just said, there was this one woman. That's what made me think of it, right? And so how do we ensure families have those cookie people? And the young people, how do we ensure they have cookie people? Yeah.
I like that. I'm gonna remember that now. That's a good one. Linda, do you want to address that? What needs to happen to Sophie?
I think Justice Murray Sinclair, when he said education got us into this mess and education will get us out, and I strongly believe some of our new directions, and as I said, in history, where we don't tell just one story of one particular group, we broaden the story so our students in the classroom see themselves reflected in the curricula. I think that's really important, integral. It's exciting, some of the things happening in Manitoba, I'm sure throughout the country. Well, even we saw it with the children singing. I think that came out of Pierre Elliott Trudeau, Is Anybody Listening? It's going right across the country. So we had Winnipeg School Division, our largest school division, held, before COVID hit, held a powwow, and everybody was invited. And I know we have other school divisions in Manitoba who've done the same thing. And the kids were having so much fun learning from elders, learning from people who were doing beadwork, learning from storytellers. And that's the type of thing that, and I go back to that, First Nations have an ongoing role in shaping Canada's history. And so to be inclusive in that storytelling, I think, and our history is central to engagement.
Phyllis, and then I think we got one more question then to kind of wrap it up. We're already gone through almost an hour and a half. I believe that's the correct time. My eyes are a little bit old, so I'm having difficulty reading the text.
I like that, Monique, cookie people. Because when I was thinking about my response to the question, is that everybody has their area of expertise. And I know on the 30th, I was being asked about water and all kinds of different things on my media interviews. And my area is residential school and my family's history. But one of the, for my story, I lived with my granny until I was 10 on the reserve. And that was because my mother was told by the Indian agent to leave. And so that's going to be in the new book. But and then my aunt took me when she finished university. So she was my cookie person, my cookie people. And she went to the ministry and they called me their child. And she refused when they said that to sign any papers, to whatever, to get money, she did it on her own, and we struggled. But she took the responsibility for me and refused the help of the ministry because they called me their child. And so, and she raised my son as well. I was pregnant. On my 14th birthday, my son was 4 months old, and I never did have any more children, but she basically raised the both of us. And so I don't know what the magic, is for this. Dr. Cindy Blackstock, to me, is the expert in this area. And she's probably maybe watching and, oh, say this, say that. But that's not my area of expertise. I can tell what my experience is, but somebody that works in that every day and is in the know is better equipped to answer that than I can. So that's what I have to offer.
I definitely appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So there's just one more question here. I appreciate, and maybe it's not, but I'm going to ask all of you actually. We'll just hold on to that one for a second. What does reconciliation, or what is an ideal world moving forward for both Indigenous and non-Indigenous children in regard to reconciliation and how we can change for you? Like, what will make the world better for you? Let's start with Monique.
Well, for me, reconciliation means making the invisible visible. And I think about that in regards to history. I think that in regards to our stories, to our resilience, to our knowledge, to the DNA that runs through us. And I don't mean, that big word, deoxyribonucleic acid, but I think about, DNA being our destiny, our natural abilities, and our ancestral support. And so I think that the more we have the courage, and that's why I love in Every Child Matters that Phyllis is right there front and center on the courage page, because the more we have the courage to show up, to defy, the history of the past system, to defy the history of residential schools, day schools, all of the legislation, then change happens, because our young people will see, oh, it's like Phyllis, she could do that. Maybe I could too. And in there is such power. So that's my hope, is that the invisible continues to become visible.
Beautiful. Linda?
Yeah, I would say I totally agree. What's been made invisible by our history, by the storytellers, has to be visual, and so we have to go back and we have to tell the stories of Dr. Peter Bryce. We have to have elders explain our interrelationship with the land and teach us about sustainability. I remember the time I heard that the Inuit have hundreds of different terms for the word snow. And so the complexity of that thinking just intrigues me. And so we need to hear those stories. We need to revise our curricula so it's not so linear, as I said, and tells a broader story and is a more inclusive story. It saddens me sometimes to think about the lost voices, and so I want to find them in history and tell those stories to students in the classrooms for the future.
Phyllis?
What comes to mind is, again, Murray Sinclair's words. He's quoted a lot when I talk and in our book, but I heard him say that Canada will know it's close to reconciliation when Indigenous people no longer refer to their lives as a healing journey. And that really made sense, because I'm definitely on a healing journey. And so as the generations go on, they won't have all of the stuff that we have now. And I always go back to my own personal experience with my grandchildren. I have 1 son and 5 grandchildren. And my hope for them is that they can live in a world where they know their history, their peers and know their history. Because even though my education is business and accounting, I went to get a business loan, and it was assumed I was on welfare. And I was asked if you people did tax returns. And so it's my hope for my grandchildren that their peers, and when they go to get a loan, that they will be understood, and they will be and equal, and to be able to not look down upon, like my 2 granddaughters, that yeah, they're just on welfare. She's a Native woman, so she must be on welfare. And so my hope, it's for hope and change, and I heard that in the documentary, not just hope but for change, and that the change is for my grandchildren to not have to go through and live through and fix what we're currently dealing with, that everything is out there and dealt with, because now we're doing work with the missing children and unmarked burials. That I was on a Zoom this past, and a person on the Zoom said that we need to deal with this in our lifetime and not pass it on to the next generation. So yeah, so just being together and having it, I don't know if it would be easier, but definitely better.
So we're just about, we're getting close to the 2-hour time. Is there anything that anyone would like to say to wrap it up? Final words, thoughts, or something that you've just been really wishing you could say to close out the evening?
I'll go so that I'll be done. One of the questions on our information was, what was our favorite part? And for me, it was, I had 2. It was Chantal Dick Charlson, her slam poetry. I just love that. And I wish that was me when I was that age with that. It was about intergenerational survivors, and Rosie, the 5-year-old Rosie Darling, Métis, given the history of the Métis, it just amazes me. So
very powerful young people, absolutely. Yeah. You can catch those on the Facebook page as well, the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation. If you're watching and you haven't saw them, they're all available there too in short form. So Linda?
Yeah, I would say stay connected. Connect for the teachers that are listening today. Connect with your local social studies community. Connect with national social studies communities. There's going to be a new one that's just being established called the National Network of Social Studies Teachers. So if you're interested in finding out more, I'm sure if you Google it, you can find that. Stay connected with your consultants in your area. Yes, they produce documents, and some people just like to use them as doorstops, but they're more than that. Really, our heart and soul is in what we do, and we're constantly finding ways to make connections, in my case through the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation with the Canadian Commission for UNESCO, who put out amazing resources. And then I can share those with educators, because educators are working in the trenches, hard every day, and they don't have the time to explore. And so your curriculum consultants are exploring, are vetting through the materials, and then are narrowing down what I think is the best of the best, like the Project of Heart books, which I also highly recommend for educators. So that would be my advice.
Okay. Final thoughts, Monique?
Well, there was a little ding there.
Like, should I come and pick you up? I was like,
I think that one of my concerns around education is that what I'm still seeing is that the majority of the work being done in schools is still by Indigenous people. And I think that not only the work in the classrooms, but the emotional work as well. And I really invite those of you who are watching who are allies to be useful allies, and not to ask, what can I do, but to begin to be self-determined and begin to be on a journey that takes away some of the weight of the responsibility around educating hearts and minds from the Indigenous people in your staff or your community to a way that is more like a reciprocal balanced bridge. Because I just see some of our people in our communities in schools, and I saw one woman post, you know, the September 30th for her is a day of trauma. And yet she's expected to keep going into the classroom every day all day to tell her story in 5 different classes. And so I just really worry about our people, and how do we make sure that we can support them to be well, and how do we support Phyllis, who's out there telling her story all the time, to be well, and not always being the ones carrying the emotional labor of the work. Yeah.
Miigwech to you all, and on behalf of the Center and Every Child Matters, I really appreciate the journey that you joined us on, because it was tremendous, and it is difficult to produce that kind of programming and talk, but I really am thankful that everyone participated and shared your gift with us, and honored to join you this evening. So miigwech. Be well, everyone.
You. Yes, be well and stay safe.
Stay safe. Take care.
Kinanaskomotin.
See you.